We will have the conversations that few are prepared to have, and more importantly, conversations centered on rationality. Subscribe now to listen to Rational Voices with Sunil.
Been a busy day. I'm doing meetings, bringing people together as we often do from different areas, looking at the things we're doing from past Christmas in the new year. We've got a number of events around the country that we're doing. We're working a lot behind the scenes with people around the Farmers Initiative, with getting the public and small, medium-sized businesses involved. So, I mean, there's a lot going on at the moment.
See, I where I've become aware of yourself is a lot of the political activism that you've been doing in the last few weeks and months. Obviously, you've got a story before all of that. It'd be great to hear a bit about your background and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah. So I started my life in business really as an entrepreneur, putting on dance party events around the world. I went traveling when I was young, and before, I'd done my A levels, and I sort of like what people call a gap year, but I went traveling and I went around Asia, but I took a couple of years, and I was working in different places. We kind of put on events, and ended up in Australia putting a lot of big parties, what they call dance party events, on. And then came back to the UK and was very involved in that, and sort of managed artists and put on events around the country, and did like Ibiza style, one of the first ever Ibiza tours and things like that. And that all kind of then ended up landing in us being involved in transforming the former Truman Brewery in Brick Lane. It's a 11-acre site, 20 buildings, over a few streets, turning it into a music, film, fashion destination business hub. And we anchored that around launching something called the Vibe Bar, which was a place for people to network and do events. Very cutting edge at the time. We did things like one of the first ever live internet broadcasts with Channel 4. We did a range of things that were really cutting edge, and then linking that to sort of early Glastonbury events with the first ever live internet broadcast from there. And sort of very exciting activities, events, live screenings. We're involved, we had things there like Gunther von Hagen's Body World exhibition, where he did a live autopsy on TV, and lots of music videos, part of Fashion Week, but also Fashion East, which was an initiative that came out of that. And we were constantly doing events, bringing businesses in there from music and film and design. The idea was that you could work and network and not have to have all the infrastructure of a major corporation, but have that sort of close cheek by jowl, and you could benefit from that networking situation, do an event, kind of like bring business guests there, get new opportunities at a time when those things weren't really happening much. Now it's kind of pretty de rigueur, obviously got WeWorks and places like that, but at the time it wasn't a model,
Right.
Particularly. But we did big festivals like Brick Lane Festival. We worked with a lot of people like Talvin Singh and others to do destination events and attractions, and it transformed the area. The World Bank cited it as an example of urban regeneration. And it was a general great success story all around. Thousands of jobs created, hundreds of tenants, like press attention. Everyone wanted to be involved in it. If you look back at the days of that really naff thing, but called Britannia, we had a lot of those, discussions about how this was the epicenter of a lot of those things. And after 20 years or so of all of that good news, we had a situation where, with one of our key businesses, which was the Vibe Bar, where we were experiencing this mad situation with the police, where it felt like they were treating us like criminals. And what it transpired was that Sir Bernard Hogan Howe, who was the commissioner at the time, spelled it out. Basically they decided to go after hospitality businesses because they felt so under pressure from the cuts to policing, the increased requirements to deal with things like paedophilia and online censorship and online harms and terrorism, and they just didn't feel like they had the resource. And their idea was, well, it was too much resource that's going on nighttime and overtime, so we'll shut down 50% of nighttime activity. And that was mad, but I ended up finishing after 20 years at the Truman Brewery, but then launched something called the Nighttime Industry Association, so a trade union that lobbied, came out when there were already there were already sort of trade bodies that represented big operators, but no one who really explained what was going on with nightclubs and bars. And we ran I did that for sort of 6-7 years. I was the founder of it with others, and I was the first chair. We did a lot of successful campaigns like Save Fabric, Save Nightlife. I explained a lot internationally. I used to talk in different cities around the world about the importance of destination hubs, regenerating areas around night and day, why you needed eyes and activity on things, talking about all sorts of things like what had happened in the 70s and the 80s in New York, why lighting up the streets and having people as part of the network and the community was really important. And we basically stressed that we needed to bring the police and councillors and everyone around the table with hospitality and the local community and have a proper discussion and not treat us like the enemy. And that was really successful. I mean, over several years, we ended up working, I explained to the Home Office and the Treasury and the police, the head of police chiefs. We did a number of initiatives. I brought the nighttime mayor from Amsterdam and the Berlin Club Commission to London to meet Boris Johnson's team when he was mayor, and then Sadiq Khan's team. And we got the new roles put in for nighttime ambassadors, nighttime czars, in London and in Manchester and Bristol. Unfortunately, I said to the people who were in power, I said, don't appoint people that just all agree with you. Have people that are independent. Otherwise, you'll have the deficit that already exists in politics will continue, and it will be a kind of lame horse. And unfortunately, they did some of that, some of them. Anyway, all of that led to a situation where I got quite a lot of experience with lobbying and getting things done. And we were very successful at turning around the opinions and working with Scotland Yard and others and the, as I say, mayors and MPs and the cabinet, pretty much right up until lockdowns were announced.
Right.
And then we were still speaking to the government a little bit, but then the shutters came down and they stopped talking to everyone. And I was like, guys, they're just, and the narrative at the time was, well, you guys would say this in hospitality. You don't care about health and people because you just want to make money, as though somehow everyone's cavalier and they don't care about society, which was a real anathema. It was like really contrary to everything. At the time, lots of people, I worked with people like Harvey Goldsmith and others, they were offering up, Alex Proud, they were offering up venues and space and logistics to work out at the start. No one really knew what was going on, how we can perhaps be problem solvers, solution providers. But it was very clear that quickly, all these years that we'd spent, and we got people like Sydney, the city of Sydney, and other cities around the world to change their attitude, to open things up, to say that, we needed to transform and open things up. All of a sudden, it shut everything down again. And basically, I realized fairly fast that a lot of the things that were being said were more about drama and fear and panic than actually based in concrete reason, or certainly based in scientific approach, right, of questioning and discussing and reflecting on. And so quite soon I launched something called Open for All. We got over 1,000 operators in Britain of all different sizes, some who had like multiple chains, 30, 40 outlets, some who were independent, one or two, to do something called Open for All, to say that they would not demand to see citizens and their customers' papers, no vaccine passports. And that was a very successful campaign and it got a lot of attention. But it was also clear that when Boris Johnson said we're going to have Freedom Day, after all this time, we've had all these lockdowns, a lot of people were sort of campaigning against things and doing demos. And I had a conversation with a lot of people and I said, they're just not listening to any of us. Doesn't matter how big a following people have got, or they just kind of, we're in silos. So we need to have an umbrella, an overarching kind of movement and that can represent different people, different campaign groups, people from different business sectors, people of faith and secular people who are opposed to just impositions, a lack of scrutiny in Parliament, a lot of fear and nudge and not having proper free speech and reflection on things. And so we basically, just over 3 years ago, we launched Together. It was a declaration at the time, and that the first part of one of our key principles, there were 6, was that we should not have these papers please society, not have these what they call vaccine passes, but insistence on mandatory ID, and to see your most private information to access everyday life. And that was really successful. We got a couple of 100,000 signatures quite quickly. We then went on to campaign against mandatory vaccinations for people in the health sector. So we had people that were nurses and doctors that had been working for a year on the front line. People had been clapping and cheering for them. And then they were losing their jobs, like the care workers. We lost 45,000 care workers who didn't want to take a procedure. And we sort of did a big campaign, got them onto the mainstream, a lot onto Good Morning Britain and BBC Breakfast. And they were brilliant frontline workers, and they did videos. And we had a real good campaign that kind of got the kind of human element of the communication over. So that was really fantastic. It was a real success when we actually finally won it. I mean, basically, it was a combination of things. And obviously, the government at the time, Sajid Javid and others, they were sort of trying all different things to impose on us. But there was an objective recognition as well that you couldn't really lose all of these people. But the point that was made was that you could work together with different groups of people, rally a campaign, and have what we call a 360 approach, which is calls to action. So getting our signatories to write to their MPs, to visit them, to call them, to say their votes depend on this, to say think again, we're not happy with this, to lobby institutions, NHS trusts, local trusts, to engage with the cabinet and councillors, and to use our foundation, the base of our relationships, and our local regional ambassadors around the country, to engage with people. We went to 10 Downing Street and we put in signed petitions of over 350,000, and really basically were able to get things in the press, show that we could have some success, and push things back and say, we've got a voice, the public needs to be engaged in this. You can't just do things constantly like technocratic impositions. We need to be engaged with. So that's the background to us and where we've come from.
There's so much to unpack there, and so many things we can touch back on. But I want to go a bit onto hospitality, because especially during COVID, I was working in London, in the city, going in fairly frequently, even when restrictions started to ease. And I just remember thinking, wow, it was so depressing to see so many pubs and bars just being closed. That we just literally no idea. You could see the impact straight away. From your knowledge, are we back to pre-COVID? Are we, as hospitality, back to that same stage, or is it not the same?
Nowhere near. I wrote quite a few articles at the time, and we lost about 15,000 hospitality venues just in the period through the lockdowns, and subsequently we've been losing a lot. There was already a trajectory for pubs closing year on year, but this has been consolidated. Nightclubs, the whole combination of a perfect storm of egregious, excessive licensing impositions, a lack of granting later licenses, overly zealous impositions that cost much more money, from security measures, surveillance, extra security everywhere because the police don't want to police things, and a whole range of things like that. And what we all went through, and that's happened in areas that are really popular as well. In London, for instance, in places like Camden and Shoreditch, and the things that have made those areas successful, and the reason why you've got ad agencies and other businesses and tech companies going there, has all been massively impacted. And you can see that that's happening in other areas as well, in Peckham and around London. And in similar ways, if you look at places like Birmingham, where the Custom Factory and others are, and these great destination hubs, all of these measures where you've had licensing regimes and you've had a blunt tool to impose things, you've had this narrative around the public as though somehow we're evil and vectors of antisocial behaviour, when actually, what's interesting is I used to joke with the older police guys, they used to call Fridays, when I was growing up in Britain, Friday fight night. But Britain used to be quite a violent place, right? And it just used to be called going out in Britain. And what's changed is that was not the case in the most recent period. Around hospitality, there is a discussion about what's going on with younger people and around cities and that type of thing. But around hospitality and events, that's just not like it was. And yet the narrative was that all this antisocial behaviour is going on. Well, what we managed to get the police to understand was, we took Glasgow as an example, was that when they shut down one of the most famous clubs there called the Arches in Glasgow, they thought that, okay, this is going to stop sort of drugs or drink or bad behaviour. They had this idea in their head. What they discovered was nothing of the sort. But what then happened was, you didn't have people in a club with licensed security and people having measures and people saying, well, you've had too much or you need to go. What you had was people doing things all around the city and elsewhere. And when there was an incident, the police couldn't get to it and they were overstretched, and it exacerbated all their issues. Plus, the clubs that remained didn't really want to talk to the police about things because they were too scared their business was going to get shut down.
Right.
So what's happened is, it's been terrible from a point of view of business. And we managed to change the discussion and the dialogue, the narrative around. But what's happened subsequently, people say, oh, people don't drink anymore, young people, they don't want to go out. There's an element of that. But the whole stay at home, don't go out thing, the cost of things has had an enormous impact. But also all sorts of other things, like all these emergency traffic orders that have come in during COVID, during lockdowns, that things about stopping traffic going around hospitality areas. I mean, Edinburgh's an example, Glasgow's another example of how it's decimated foot traffic and people coming to the city, right, on cars, not being able to get around that. That's true of the Midlands and other areas as well. We've seen a whole range of measures that are just all about sanitising and limiting and restricting. So you've got this situation where this is almost like, you've had, on the one hand, you've had this kind of public health agenda that sort of presents us going out, what we've done for thousands of years, right? The majority of people decent, drinking, going out, having fun together, lighting up the streets, creating phenomenons on the dance floor, like how do you get an Adele and a Stormzy, or how do you get a fashion week? It's all on the dance floor, in the nightclubs. That's where it has all come from in the post-war period. All that soft power that people talk about, right? That's come from that cultural phenomenon. And these things are being limited and stifled to an extent that you can't go out. If you fly in from LA, or if you fly in from Mumbai and you want to go in the recording studio and then you want to go somewhere, or you've been in the design studio, there's very few places in London, a so-called international city, you can go to late at night, unless it's a private members club, which not everyone's a member of. And so it's dire and it needs to get resolved. Unfortunately, the Mayor of London has not, he talked quite initially some good things, but he got it largely wrong. And we had a task force that was set up, and I set up a kind of nighttime commission with some other people with them and brought them all there. But it wasn't effectively done. It has been slightly better done in some other areas, bits of Manchester and Bristol, but unfortunately, it's too politicised. And you just basically, what we need in Britain is we need an unshackling of entrepreneurialism. We need to let planning bureaucracy get out the way. We need to engage the public, local people and businesses, and have it unfettered and say, look, let's have some areas that can be 24 hours. Like you got the Asian night markets. It doesn't mean people going crazy everywhere. You can have quiet zones, but 24-hour zones where younger people want to be, triple glazed buildings and houses where people know that they're getting accommodation like that. And then other areas that are quieter, and let's curate all of that and make it work. They've done that in other cities, like parts of Amsterdam and Barcelona and Berlin. And obviously techno-tourism in Berlin's been enormous. It's been a huge thing that has revitalized everything since the end of the Berlin Wall, right? I mean, it's been phenomenal. And you see in places like Ibiza and Miami and elsewhere where art and music and fashion and all have come to be real transformers. So like with our tech and like, excuse me, with biomedicine and a range of other things, innovation that we could really be catalysts for. I think what we need is a kind of an outlook that's a bit like a festival outlook. But if you imagine the Great Exhibition in Britain for our intellectual and creative capital and entrepreneurialism, get bureaucrats out the way, and really become a bastion again for engineering and design and creativity night and day, and flourish and but also allow failure but have retraining. And instead what we've got is too much technocrats, too much zealot ideologues around the public sector and in the private sector. Frankly, we've got zombie companies that are just too big to fail, and so all of that's a lot, but much of that has got consolidated during what happened with lockdowns, that some of those impetuses, right? And like also the discussions around ESG and EDI, which we can talk about, but in the private sector and the public sector. But having said all of that, I think the really exciting thing together is that we've worked with a lot of people in different parts of the country who have shown leadership. They've fought against low traffic neighbourhoods, low emission zones. We've campaigned to get cash kept with the Bank of England. We've campaigned with the FCA to stop people being debanked. We've found and met lots of new leaders, regionally, nationally, and like with the farmers, where we keep doing things. And what's so exciting, Sunil, is what's happening with America as well, where you've got a situation where this kind of impulse of the public being fed up with the same old and the old technocrats, the old spin, and a whole new range of people working together and coming out and putting some of our needs at the forefront. So I'm very optimistic about where we are, even though it's very terrifying, some of it, because these weak, I call them teeny technocrats, the teeny technocrats that are weak authoritarians. We've seen, like over the summer and subsequently, how Keir Starmer's come out, and their answer is always the same: suffocate free speech, try and weaponize the law more. We saw the Tories do it as well. If we're honest, they, rather than using the laws they had to deal with people like Just Stop Oil, rather than use their authority, they were putting all new laws in place, right? Which in the end suffocates all of us. They're unnecessary, and so I think there's some real challenges. Particularly around free speech and the rights to protest and privacy and all of that, and conscience. However, I'm very excited about the fact that a lot of people have stood up, have challenged things, have won some things, and that's been our experience together. We just, as I always say, we need to get out with more people, meet more of the public, and get more people involved and signed up as members.
You've had an incredibly successful entrepreneurial career. I've got a question. Do you think if you were starting now, not that it's more difficult, I don't like using that, but do you think it's maybe harder now, or do you think the dynamic's different from when you were starting, when you were co-founding the old Truman Brewery and your whole stage? Do you think now it'd be more difficult in your position?
Well, I think that, on the one hand, there's a kind of dreary misanthropic outlook, right, which is like, oh, everything's so tough. And I think about my grandparents and others that went through world wars and all around the world, right? And it's like when I first went to Goa and I met this guy who'd been there since the 60s, and he was saying, and this was like 1988, and he's saying, oh, it's not like it used to be. And I'm like, well, I'm here now. I don't care. And in a way, I've got that attitude that there's always blossoming opportunities and exciting potential. I mean, think of the internet and all of these opportunities that are there. I mean, it was a very particular time when I started doing things, and I lost a couple of companies that we'd set up, but I had a bit more of an attitude that was like the Americans have, which is that this is a way that you learn. I mean, trial by fire. I had a company that we had in Timpan Alley in Denmark Street. The music guys were, Pink Floyd and all that started recording there. And I had to, give back with the lease, the keys. We'd done a tour. Some of it was great, some of it wasn't. I had to give him my first computer that I'd got, that I'd written things on, and pay him off and then pay everyone off. But I did, and I ended up paying everyone back. And in the end, that set us up in London as people and we were below Acid Jazz. And actually, I became friends with the guys that launched Freeze in a tiny little office. And 2 or 3 years later, I did their first event at the Truman Brewery with them. The point is that it was really tough, because in the sense that there was all these acid house parties going on, all the jobs, the Thatcher period had been there, and the whole idea of you'd have a job for life, or you shipbuilding in Britain or mining, that had all gone. Some people were doing well in the city, but there was a real sense of, well, what is next? How do we do it? But that whole can-do outlook of the whole acid house movement, that DIY, go out and do it. It was like the Thatcherist view, a bit more like go out, you can assert yourself and you can have, but we had there was a lot of bumpy stuff. We went to, I remember the first time I went to a bank, the bank manager of my business partner, and he just laughed at us. He said, well, we don't really do the fools and horses, he was going, the Del Boy and that, like, we were trying to explain to him the business we were doing, and he was, and I was like, right, you know what, I'm going to tell everyone, every interview I do, who, and I don't do it anymore because it's long gone, but what bank this is and what it is, because we are going to make it, but you've lost an opportunity. So, you know, unlike if you go to Silicon Valley, everyone knows that there are companies set up, equity venture capitalists that can invest in your company if you get it right. That happens here in tech roundabout and all of that too now, right? So in certain areas, you've got that infrastructure, you've got that history, you've got that sense of possibility. There's a lot of that. We didn't have any of that. When I was telling people we want to do events and bring these people together, real estate, with the people were like, you're nuts, what are you talking about? And friends of mine that were running KISS and other things like that, they were like, well, it's a nice idea, Alan, but you're not even going to get people to come to the East End. None of the people will come from Soho. You ain't getting anyone. So there were challenges then, and it wasn't easy, right? And I can just tell you that if I had had any money at the time, the houses and property on Brick Lane, you couldn't get mortgages for them. If you had cash, you could buy them. They were worth almost nothing. But the thing is, no one had capital except for the people we did the partnership with, they did, but even they didn't have that much at the time. And so the thing is that there are difficulties now, in the sense that it's very difficult to make money in Britain. Once you start, you have to become very successful. So people who are doing okay-ish, the incentives are much more to go to places like Dubai or Singapore or others, because aside from anything else, you make some money here, you have to make a lot of money to make it really work. Now, there is obviously benefits to being in London and being in Birmingham and Manchester and elsewhere, right? But there's a lot of drawbacks as well. And we're spending a lot of money. We've got leaders that are spending money on all sorts of things. Forget the weather for a second. Things could be a whole lot better. And they've made it more and more difficult to be entrepreneurial, to have a business. So I think the thing is, there's lots of opportunities. I always encourage people to do things, but there's also the truth that you end up working much harder, quite a lot, for yourself. You'll do things that you wouldn't do sometimes when you work for someone else. You might get paid a lot less for quite a lot longer, and if you have a 2 or 3 trial runs, it will set you up for the future. But you've got to be able to do it. You've got to have perseverance, and not everyone can do that, right? You might have circumstances where you just have to have the money in now, so you've got to go work in for someone, and you can't do that, as you might have to do it later. So yeah, I think things are different, but I'm very much of the mind that if you think about it as well, like I've traveled a lot around different parts of the world, and you see people who are entrepreneurial, they've got nothing, no infrastructure around them, and they just go do it. So I think we have to kind of contextualize it a bit.
I think I've got almost, it's very similar with you on this point, because part of me thinks, in particular with my generation, slightly younger, older, is sometimes I'll say to my wife quite a lot, where I just think in some ways it's easier, because I look at a lot of my generation, and I think, unlike maybe yours and previous, where they would go out and do things, I don't think we really do much, and I don't think we necessarily potentially work as hard. So I think if you're of reasonably young age and you're prepared to work, like really work, I think it's a lot easier to be successful, because I just don't think a lot of my generation, even younger, are prepared anymore to put any serious work in. So I do think in that, sometimes I think if you're really consistent, you just disciplined, I think you've got a really good chance. On the other side, I do question the entrepreneurial spirit in Britain. Similar to what you said, I just feel like the idea of failure is so bad in Britain, whereas in America it's you fail, okay, go again, you fail, you go again, you go bankrupt, not the end of the world, you keep going. Whereas I think in Britain we're a bit more, it's seen as a really big deal when you go out and fail, whereas I think in other cultures it's a bit more okay, no big deal, just sort of go again. Would you agree with that? Similar? Would you say it's similar to your?
Yeah, and I think, well, one of the things we launched, we have a kind of cabinet, and we talk about a number of different areas. I think in productivity and the economy, what we need is to be able to harness our smarts and to have risk taking and go for it. But it doesn't mean being silly. You still kind of lay out a plan, and you weigh it up, and you use judgment and exercise discretion, but you recognize that not everything's going to work. And in order to get a plane, you have to have lots of crashes and misses, right? And you have to keep experimenting, and you keep having that spirit of adventure. And you try and set up an infrastructure that can help facilitate that. They have that at Silicon Valley. You have it in, parts of India and obviously in China and elsewhere. And it's very interesting when you're in other parts of the world and you listen to young people there and then you compare it to people here. They're not going whatever. They're saying, yeah, this is the future. We're doing the future. Parts of Africa where lots of exciting things are happening. And I think that we need to get into a position where we don't say, oh, it's great to fail all the time, but you say, it's okay because you learn a lot, and we need to have almost creative destruction. You need to have companies that are just not good enough fail. If we keep propping up these zombie companies, we'll not become productive and efficient. To become a world leader again, which Britain could do, right? We're sixth biggest economy in the world still, right? But the sclerotic nature of our public sector, our services, our inefficiency, and some of that attitude of, nah, I'm not doing that, or it's not working. I think we need to recalibrate that. I think we've had a long time. I don't want to stereotype all people, because young people, they get a bad rap sometimes, and they're all snowflakes. Look, there's brilliant, smart, good, dedicated people, right? Some of them, particularly in the younger generation. I don't know what they're called now, but in the people that are around, they're 18 to 22 now, right? They're not the same as. Right. They're not the same as people who the late 20s and mid 30s group, right? They've got different attitudes and outlook. But I think it's also about adults and leaders giving a lead and saying, this is what's needed and this is what's expected, right? You can't come to college and not know how to write an essay. You've got to read a book. You can't just get ChatGPT to write your essay. We expect standards. We expect excellence. It starts at school. It starts at our whole approach with our attitudes to our values and principles, and us upholding them as citizens and supporting fellow adults. The collapse of authority, the disintegration of values, the question of tradition and pride and what it means to be a nation and expectations, all of those things reflect. And if one goes to certain places, right, if you go to, let's say you go to Doha, or you go to UAE, or you go to Dubai, or any, you can go and earn money, but if you just disrespect their way of doing things, you'll come a cropper really quickly, like in Singapore. They're very clear, right? You can come and make a lot of money, but this is our country and this is how we do it here. And if you don't abide by these rules, and some people might think they're barbaric, but the thing is, you make a choice, right? These are the rules, but they understand who they are and what they're doing. And I think that we should recognise that, because some of the people that are running things and are all embarrassed about, we want to decolonise the calendar or whatever it is, just get rid of everything. The sense of what's so fantastic and the opportunity we've had. I just look back at growing up in Britain and I think it's incredible opportunity, right? Of education, of people, of exciting mixture, dynamic. But also I grew up in a time where teachers used to say to me, pop music is fine, but you don't know what you're talking about. You need to come and listen to Bach and Beethoven, and this is better. And you really don't know what you're talking about, and you need to learn it. I'm going to bring you to the Royal Festival Hall. And that was a normal school, by the way. That wasn't a private school. That was and it was just, an adult shared that view, and they held the line together. And and it wasn't like, oh yeah, I want to be like you and dance, like your embarrassing uncle at a party. It was like, yeah, we've got something. This is something worth knowing about. Our cultural legacy, our history, these things that the best that's been thought and spoken, Matthew Arnold's point, these bits about what the Enlightenment was, what the Renaissance was, how these things have flourished. How did you get commerce? Why was it that mercantile wealth and industrial revolution transformed things? What does freedom do? How do you pay for an NHS when everyone keeps saying the NHS? Commerce and that spirit of human possibility, right? Those things, and wealth creation for everyone. These are vital things along with our artistic flourishing. And I think we've I was on the Arts Council briefly for a few years, right? And you can just see the kind of attempt to make everything ideological. It's so stifling and limiting, and it's a real problem. We need to shake out of it.
We were talking earlier about sort of COVID and the impact of COVID in terms of hospitality and general authoritarian regimes in the UK, the way the structure says, the restrictions. Do you think we'll ever have that switch back? I've been, and the reason I said that is because I've been really almost disappointed to see post-COVID more people, if you like. I think there was a stat out recently about how people would be potentially for lockdowns during like the flu season, and how for me it really worries me in the sense of this kind of idea that giving the state more power, it seems to be more ingrained. And I know generally they say in young people you tend to be thinking that way inclined, but I've definitely seen it a lot more, whether it be my generation or younger, that are growing into this. Some of these people extremely young. This is what they've grown up with. This sort of people of school age and the way it affected university. Do you see that shift potentially happening? Do you think it will get worse? What do you see in terms of Britain, in terms of the authoritarian regime? Because I know that the current government's not exactly popular, but they did get the election, they did win. Is that a concern for you? And do you think that will impact businesses?
Well, it's an enormous concern if they think they're going to try and bring lockdowns in, but I got to say, I don't think that's going to fly here. Now, obviously, when you ask people loaded questions and you say, and you could have this conversation like the assisted dying bill, you say, do you think people should not suffer? And you have to be fairly ardent view. I mean, you could say all life is suffering, right? But, most people say we don't think people should suffer. But that's one way of asking a question, right? And then if you say, well, should the state have a license to kill? That's a different way to ask that question, right? It's the same question potentially, right? But you're asking it in different ways and you'll get a very different response from people. And that's also like, well, would you do a lockdown around flu? Or if I'm going to pay you to stay at home and hang out, would you do that? Well, maybe, right? I mean, like some people had a great time during that, right? At a very selfish level. There's a whole load of other people working right the way through it, right? I think that it's going to be more difficult in Britain for that to be pulled off. People are not going to have it. We're not going to have it. We're organised now. We make this point, right? If there was a Black Death or a plague that really came, they already would take some measures to do it themselves. People are not stupid.
Yeah.
But the idea that the state, and you can see it a bit now with like, you've got to go and wear masks again to visit hospitals around flu season, or everyone the BBC sort of promoting certain procedures and all that, and you just wonder, you think, right, it's like the discussion of the COVID inquiry. It's not really fit for purpose, but even with that, revelations that have come out, or even like this safe and effective procedure, right, the vaccination, which all along, what we have said is we need to have more scrutiny and debate and discussion. Why are people getting censored about this? Why are they getting closed down? And why is it now that there's readily admitted that there are far more impacts with this particular set of things, the jabs, from the different companies, being admitted from their own companies, AstraZeneca and others? Why is it still difficult for people to talk about that? Why was it just punted as safe and as effective? Why was it argued that it should be given to children when like the whole benefit cost ratio, and what about all the impacts and harms that are bigger than all the others in the post-war period put together? These are all concerns, right? We were pumped this narrative, safe and effective, it's really, and I think that many people have seen that, and some are now seeing it with fresh eyes, because no one really wants to think, oh gosh, I had this happen to me, and is this why this is happening, right? But all sorts of things are going on, and I think what's important is that we're able to really have free speech, debate, discuss them. Some people should be held accountable, right? It's tricky because a lot of people have been promoted upwards. And we're great, wonderful job. We've all did that, now we're doing this. But what's happening is there's a bit more of a reckoning going on, and there's a bit more of dialogue. And there's a lot of people that have come together who have had very different backgrounds, right? So people that might have been from the old left, the old right, centre, independent, that have got a different orientation that is much more about, well, how do you see humans? How do you see the idea of privacy, sovereignty, agency? Should we have this state-like thing that has decision-making, ever-increasing power? Should we mainly get that out of the way? Should it just, I mean, I happen to think you can use the state to build some hospitals and schools and bridges, right? I think, that's not a terrible thing. Some libertarians disagree. But the idea that they're in every part of our private lives and discussing them with our families that's a huge problem, right? And I think that there are some, and it's not just young people, there are some people that just hate the public. They hate people so much in the abstract. This idea of the gammon and white van man and the disgusting Nazis everywhere, and you can see how they talk about it, and often it manifests itself around the idea of whiteness or white working class men, and they think that if you allow the public to talk about things or do things, that you're going to end up with this terrible situation. Actually, so they want more state intervention. They think they're the great and the good. They're the technocrats. That's why Keir Starmer says he prefers Davos to Westminster. But what's so fascinating is that everything that's happened in the modern period has been as a consequence of the public being engaged in the democratic impacts. They're the things that have shaped things, right? You go back, right, civil rights and suffragettes, and prior to that, the whole, everyone from William Tyndale and others, think about the Britain and Europe and the Reformation and the idea that people should be able to make decisions with conscience and read, and then pamphleteering came out of all of that, and the political, both left and right, lobbied and organised around that about how you should organise the economy. That legacy is enormously important, and even though we've had sort of 30 years of technocrats, right, and the public's moved away, in the last 10 they've come back out again. For the last 5, much more. You've had the Brexit huge discussion,
yeah,
right? Then you've had the lockdowns. Now you've got all these things going on around food and everything, and the veil's slipping, right? What people call the mainstream media. But we're doing this. Donald Trump went on Joe Rogan and Tucker Carlson. They're not, people are on X, and I'm not saying, I think it's really important to have all kinds of journalists, have it backed properly, have investigative quality standards, but we didn't see a lot of that with the mainstream media during lockdowns. They were just like tub thumping, longer, harder, faster lockdowns. So I think we're seeing changes, that people are like having kind of conversations that have been very different. They're thrashing them out, and we're seeing it, aren't we, with people like Elon Musk and others, and we're seeing the repetitive demonization of people. But it's very difficult, isn't it, when you keep, they tried to do it with us. They can't call together, they know they can't call us racist, really, because if you look at our steering group and you look at our people, it's a very hard claim to make. So they'll try to do other things, right? They'll say, sort of extremists, or they'll try and say conspiracists. But it's a similar thing. If you look at what's happened with Trump, and everyone from Tulsi Gabbard to Robert Kennedy Jr., Jay Bhattacharya with the Great Barrington Declaration. I mean, Tulsi Gabbard Bernie Sanders was going to be like a double ticket on that one, right, a little while ago. The whole thing about, how many, without getting all identitarian about it, how many Latin American, how many African American, how many women and young, how many people voted for Donald Trump, and that whole group of people there. You can see that the public's not going to get mugged off anymore. It's not going to get fobbed off with this stuff. They, and I say they, it's been everyone from Cameron to Blair and all that lot, right? All those technocrats, they got very comfortable and safe with not having to engage with the public, just treating them like a bit like, we're going to get voted in, we're the great and the good. We'll tell you, we have all these things like net zero, you're ruining the planet, so we'll tell you what to do, we'll fly everywhere. And you're like, you've squandered so much, right? And the whole potential for Britain, and you talk us down. We could have all sorts of things. We could have all our coastal regions regenerated, the universities in the sea, new airports, like drone flying things, all of that, right? And you can see Elon Musk has experimented with some things, not enough with some others that he's looked at, like the bullets underground. But that's the kind of outlook and approach that we should have, a can-do, orientation, where you sort of experimental, you're optimistic about the future, a new kind of great exhibition. We've had things like Bauhaus and the Futurists in the past and all that, great, whether there's some of them were politically flawed, but they've had an attempt to deal with the question of modernity and how we can live more beautifully in buildings with art, and I think that we need to have that flourishing. And in order to have that flourishing, you need to have the public engaged. And that's what's coming about. So I'm excited about this period. That's what we encourage with Together, to have new leaders, new people involved, have our voices heard, work together with people, even when we disagree about maybe why some things are happening or on other issues. If you agree, and I say this, we were in Scotland doing a tour in Glasgow and Aberdeen and elsewhere, and I spoke at Edinburgh when the Hate Crime Act, the bill became an act, and I was so taken by the fact that there were so many different people from different political traditions, right? There were nationalists and there were unionists. There were people of faith and there were secular. And there was a lot of things on, if you started talking about other issues, we'd all really disagree with, right? Whether it might be about abortion, it might be about, but people would have very different, but we all agreed that you got to be able to speak freely, to discuss these things. Otherwise, we're doomed. And that spirit of what we're doing and forming new alliances and new allegiances and working things out and saying, well, I don't really agree. I'm not Hayek, but I'm not with Keynes either. And but just it's like that old left-right thing's gone, right? And now the question is, what do you think about humans? Do you think we're able to be catalysts in a positive way, or should we just be caged up and put in the corner and surveyed? You know, that's becoming the distinction. Where do you stand on fundamental freedoms and rights? Do you think that even saying that makes you fascist or far right, or do you want to see those things? We need to be very upbeat and confident about doing that. And I think more and more it's like Teflon. Those criticisms, those accusations that there's slurs that they make, the public can see it. They keep making it time and time again. They're falling on deaf ears.
I think for sure, and I think it's amazing to hear what you and your group are doing, because I often feel, I think sometimes it's a bit easier for me to speak about some topics being of Indian heritage and brown. You can't throw the racism card towards me, so I find it a lot easier talking about this stuff. But I do often say, with if I was a white person over the age of 40 in Britain, I would probably not say as much as I say, whether it's on GB News, BBC, wherever media stuff, because I would be terrified of the cancel button and all that sort of stuff. Whereas I think it's a bit easier for people like myself to speak on these matters, because you can just, that race card gets thrown out. So it's amazing that you're encouraging, regardless of race, political opinion and belief, because it is, what I find really strange now is how politicized everything is, whether it's the LGBTQ movement, everything has become so political. Whereas, I was again talking to wife and friends about like how a lot of this stuff isn't political. Like a lot of it was just common sense. It had nothing to do with right or left, but it seems to be more and more politicized. Have you seen a change with the businesses you run and all these operations in terms of the politicization of just general society? And
absolutely. I mean, I would just say this, right? I grew up so I grew up on the streets fighting against racism. So I talk about Brick Lane and the old Truman Brewery, but I was there even before that, because what used to happen was you'd have skinheads in the National Front and they would organise there, and then the British movement, and there were old synagogues that were ransacked, and then there were the first generation of Bengali guys that had come in there. And I organised with other people defence campaigns where we convinced white working class people to support and defend Bengalis and others that were working in tailoring and fashion, textiles and the other areas. So we've got a common interest here, right? And that sometimes ended up being physical, and because people were getting petrol bombed. It wasn't microaggressions, right? Now, so I've come from a place where you defend the principles around things that are important, and I think that's a great British tradition and history, right? And in the East End in particular, right? And we talk about all sorts of things where Jews and Irish and non-religious people and working class people, they had the Oswald Mosley's black shirts, capes. There's a whole history of things, right? And also trade unionism at the time. In the early days, I think it was very important to get like breaks and have some of these. Now things they've become very, very different. And this is the point, right? I don't really think my attitudes have changed too much. I think now what we've got is a new kind of racism. It's actually the original racism, because what a lot of people don't know is the original eugenics movement and racism was based on the idea of a white working class that were a subspecies. It was the way the elite would refer to them, and they thought that they were beyond the pale, and they thought that they were just their characteristics, all those things about head sizes, jaw sizes, all of that. They were actually about the if you want to use the term indigenous species, indigenous communities within our own countries. And that was then transplanted and superimposed, that racialized thinking, in the period of post-colonialism most often, because it was a different discussion during colonialism as well. It was in the modern era and what people call the imperial era, the imperialist era, that became a sort of scientific racism. Now, I've grown up and in for like 35 years in Britain, and I mentioned acid house parties at the start. That was a way that we changed a lot of stuff as well. I grew up with a lot of guys, a lot of black guys. I grew up in an area there was often division between white and black guys. So I had friends all round, but I have a lot of friends that were black from a young age, and people were always in fights, and acid house parties transformed a lot of that. And gay and straight people, men and women dancing together, the lack of fighting, it changed a lot, and we transformed that, right? What's happened, I think, is that now we've got a new kind of racism that takes innate inherent attributes and then says that is who you are. So you, as a XXXY thing, you're like, well, I don't want to speak like an XXY thing. I'm an independent individual. I want to do what... Now, if you say I want to do what Martin Luther King said, and be by my character, not my pigmentation, they say, oh, that's racist. You say, well, what do you mean that's racist? Well, everything's racist. You're a white man, you can't even speak now, right? You say, well, shut up, right? As in, they say that in the same way that, and in the end, one would need to convince the majority of the public, and that's what it is. And they're not, in Britain, racist now. What actually everything in Brexit showed is that the majority of people in Britain are very welcoming. They're very, much more than lots of other Europe. But quite understandably, and actually we should talk about it much more, people are concerned about things like disgust and discontempt for history and heritage and values and family. And like I said, if you go to certain places, I can tell you, right, if you go to Beijing and start trying to smash up their statues and throw things over there, like you will quick... Now, I'm not saying we should be like the Chinese government. I'm just saying that's of true in India, it's of true in parts of Latin America, it's in true of it actually in all sorts of places, right? That the people have a respect for their background, and that is in a way people say it's all right for them to do that. But it's all right if you're in Nairobi that they've got respect for their culture, but not here. Why not here? What are you talking about? And I think we need to be much more on the upbeat about that. When I look at the people I really admire in the last 5-10 years, a lot of them have done things where it's been very scary, right? You talked about some of it, but like the trans movement and the transgender discussion, I look at people like Sharon Davis, right? And also J.K. Rowling and others, but like a lot of women that were like, again, a lot of women that are feminists that are working with other men and they all disagreed about things prior to this. But this question about, what is a woman, and also the whole Stonewall discussion, and can you have a gay man if you can just assert that you're this thing and you can't call someone a man? These things go to the core of our ability to communicate and what a thing is, and they're essential, and also who we are and how we understand each other. And if they just get erased and eliminated, and you shouldn't, this whole cancelling people, if we look at what's happened, and this is the same with ESG and EDI, these things have been put into our institutions. They haven't had a democratic discussion. We haven't won the public over to do it, and they're just being done to us. Well, now they're getting shaken up and shaken out, right? So the trans debate and discussion, when the public got a hold to understand what was going on, and we've got some very brave women to thank for that, but also some other people and the Free Speech Union and others, and people like yourself who talk about key issues, but who go, here I stand, I can do no other, a bit like Reverend Thomas Malthus. It's like, Martin Luther. I'm thinking of Malthus. It's like Martin Luther. Here I stand, I can do no other. This is so important. And I think that what's happened is that we've got a situation where people have actually ended up becoming like really authoritarian around identitarian ideas, right? And they've said, it's ascribed positions. So you as a man, you as a straight man, you as a white straight man over a certain age, you've got that. But you know what? There are people that want to be violent about things, right? And there are very big concerns, and we should be able to discuss them, like some of the radical Islamicist things that are going on in some of our cities. And that, of course, does not mean 4 million Muslim people in Britain, but there is a thing that's going on. And the fact that if you're near Bethnal Green and you happen to be a female MP and you're getting death threats thrown at you, people are tongue-tied, they can't say that's a problem, right? We need to be able to say these things and have courage and encourage, because people are thinking it, right? And the danger of not saying it and shutting it all up is you will get a reaction, right? And some of that is going to be problematic, right? And what we need to have is the antiseptic of reason and light and debate and discussion, and the best ideas win democratically, right? Because it's really essential, and that we don't end up having the sorts of things we've seen in parts of Europe and parts of other places where this kind of, on the one hand, you might have a blasphemy law, and on the other hand, you have sectarian violence amongst people. We're just not going to, we must not have that. We cannot allow those things to happen. And that's why the Together thing, it really means that. When we were going around Rochdale and Rotherham and talking to everyone about voting and getting involved. And partly it's also about remembering to get out of our own echo chamber, because sometimes it was a bit like, I was going around with the guys and we sat in a cafe and you could tell that people were a bit nervous. But once we started talking to the owners of the guys, I did a podcast from there, it was incredible. And everyone has got a little bit used to thinking, oh, they're this or they're that. Or we've got these stereotypes that they're evil or they're just wrong. And we've got to get much better at listening to people and talking to people we don't agree with and thrashing it out. We're fellow citizens. But in order to do that, we've got to have leaders that believe in our values and not just try and shut us down. And so I think with Together, the exciting thing is we keep campaigning for free speech rights, for protest, but we also say to people, if you can't do this, get out of the way. Because the public, we've got all new leaders that have come through, some in local campaigns, some are farmers, others we're seeing them, but also new political parties and individuals. And this is true, it's happening with Labour as well. Obviously they've got independents, some of them want to be associated with the Gaza thing. You're not going to just get one, you're going to get all sorts of new things breaking out. And we need to be able to thrash all this out and discuss it and win over people to our positions.
It's fascinating because it seems like you're almost trying to break this like discourse where it seems like at the moment we're more almost like divided than ever in terms of I was talking to somebody on a previous podcast and we talked about how even in dating how it's had an impact. So like we're there now, I think it's officially they've got stats in America, I don't think they have it in UK, where now the majority of Democrats would never vote a Republican and vice versa. A Republican would never date a Democrat. And there's a really good example in the early 90s where one of Bill Clinton's main advisors was dating a well-known Republican. And we were saying how that would pretty much, there's no chance that could happen in 2024. So it's interesting how your work, do you think this will have like how quickly do you think this will have an impact? I know you're saying it's having an impact already, but do you think this is a...
Well, I remember seeing that couple all the time. So I spent a lot of time in the States and I used to put events on there and I've done business there and I used to watch them on TV and I always thought she was brighter than him.
Yeah.
James Carver, I think.
James Carver, that's it, yeah.
Yeah. But I liked that and I used to think, well, it'd be interesting to see must be interesting what their kitchen table discussion. That's great. It's a lively debate. But I grew up with, my family was like that. My family had very different political views of people I loved and come from different backgrounds and attitudes. And they enabled me, it's the roots and wings moment, right? And they sort of said, you don't know anything, so you've got to listen and learn. But then at some point, and they encouraged and I flew when I really sort of got engaged and inspired by ideas, but I always respected the fact that there would be discussions and debates and not everyone agreed. And I grew up during the things like the miners' strike. I was quite young there and there were the riots in Tottenham and there was all these things that were happening and people were debating them. And, there were a more conservative outlook and then there were other people who had a more kind of socialist left-wing outlook and all these things were going back and forth. And as you're becoming mature, you're like thinking about and grappling with the world and the whole Cold War and that's changing. It's essential. Now, I hate the fact that people sort of think you're evil if you have a different view. It's the Americanization of things for quite a while. You're either a gun-toting, SUV driving, red meat, or you're kind of a vegan, like Prius, or you don't drive. And as you see it, right? But it's a very elitist pastime because it's very disingenuous and it sort of points to everyone as though they're all this swathe of the great unwashed and the terrible. And I think that we've got to be very careful and we've got to be brave in this respect as well. We have fellow citizens, right? And I'm not saying you should go out with someone or try and make a life partner with people. If you've got completely opposed views on termination, for instance, that might be really tricky. Yeah. But there is a thing about, so I would say this, right? Obviously people make their own decisions, but it is an issue that people think that they're evil or beyond the pale. I think the thing about discourse and principles is that we used to be able to say, well, all right, you really what you think that we should have a planned economy like with state ownership, or we think, well, I think it should be free market, and like, really, but you'd say, but actually we're all citizens here and we should respect the fact that we're from a nation and there's a lot of and we both have families and we believe we love each other,
Yeah.
and we're decent, generally good, but we think there are more better competitive models that work, right? Not you are scum and you should be smashed. I mean, when I saw things change so much when Antifa in America, and bear in mind my background, right? So I wasn't in Antifa, but I was involved with sort of people that were on the left, right? And I was very proud of that historically in the past, right? And when I saw Antifa now beating up Donald Trump supporters because they couldn't find any fascists, and I'm like, that is actually a definition of a fascist, beating up people that democratically vote for someone. I mean, I just couldn't. I was like, this is so terrible and terrifying, and that they think morally and ethically that's what they should be doing, and they're all pumped up on it. And you think it's so
It's hold
dangerous.
such a weird morality where they think that they know what they're doing is bad, but it's for like the greater good. So that's the rationality. So it's like this new thing where it's like, yeah, we're going to be racist or we're going to cancel Alan because it's for the greater good. That's, I think, the ridiculous like morality that they put, and it's scary because, you know, like you say, when you're doing that to people who are going out there voting for the most popular person in that country, what does that kind of say for democracy? And we've seen it with Farage, with the young girl who threw the milkshake over him, and she's obviously avoided jail. But again, it's, you know, this is a democratically elected MP. It's probably the most popular politician there is right now in Britain, probably by far, by a good distance. And they think that's a tolerant and it's an okay thing to do, which is just
Well, I think we
scary.
should also talk about people that there were so-called comedians and others that said he should have um, acid thrown over it. I mean, and they say, oh, it's just a joke. You say, well, you're allowed to joke, but other people are not allowed to joke, right? And that's not really a joke. And when people think that words are
Yeah.
violence, and you can just, so then you might as well just do violence because it doesn't matter. Or if people are stupid because they're voting and they're far right, this is the danger of, because if you shout out that someone's a racist or far right and you happen to be in the middle of Brick Lane or in the middle of Tottenham or any areas that I'm in or I go out, and they don't know you and you happen to be that white person, you could end up being in real
Yeah,
trouble, right?
yeah.
And it's a dangerous thing to do. And people should be conscious of the fact that even though it falls on deaf ears with a lot of people, it's really dangerous and it's not okay. And I think the thing is that we've seen a two-tier approach that's so stark. You can imprison people for putting posts up or shouting at dogs, and yet people that have attacked people that have burglarized or robbed or done sexual acts, you know, they're not getting imprisoned in some occasions or being let out. And you think, and why is it that certain people of certain views do? Or Bernie Spoffel, for instance, gets 6 people visit her and she gets threatened with 2 years and all of that. And if she didn't have lawyers, frankly, she probably would have been in prison, like many of the others who just said, yeah, they're guilty of that. And they didn't have great representation. It's an outrage and it's scandal. But then others are not, right? Others who said exactly the same thing, like Nick, who's the chair of Hope Not Hate, who also said, "You I hear that like a Muslim woman's had acid thrown over her," and then what then happens is a bunch of people get beaten up, and it happens to be by some guys who are Muslim who beat them up because, and you can say, well, they've seen that and they've heard that and they've gone and done that, right? Now, everyone makes their decisions about what they do. You might see it. It doesn't mean you have to do something, but you could understand why people get very upset if they've seen something and they think, I'm going to protect my community. He said, oh yeah, sorry, I got that wrong. And nothing happened. Now, I'm not saying something should happen because I think we should be allowed to speculate in public, because Keir Starmer and everyone speculating. They're saying, well, it's the far right, it's this, it's that. I'm like, hold on a minute. There are loads of people in Britain who don't agree with what's going on with migration or borders or whatever. Do you mean like you can't just say they're all this or they're all that or they're all terrorists or they're. But they're allowed to speculate, but we're not allowed to speculate, or some of us are not allowed to speculate. So we have to be allowed to speculate. But if that means everyone's got to be allowed to speculate.
There's no
And
consistency, like in what you're saying there. Yeah.
yeah, so I think that that's the thing we're upholding, whether it's on the Online Safety Act, which is really draconian, whether it's on Ofcom, whether it's on, the Home Office and the government and attempts to stifle things. And let's be honest, right? That all got hairy in August. And I don't know anyone who wasn't nervous, or anyone who was sensible. It's a bit like the cancel culture thing when it's at its height. You lose your job, you're not going to get employed, you can't work in a sector in the art. There are places I will never be able to work if I went to try and get those things now. And I've got a lot of friends who come from film and theatre, and see, some of them have come round, and obviously the lockdowns, some of them understood it because their businesses were being impacted. But there's some people that are just like, you will never work in this arena again, right? You just would not, right? And that's the cancel thing. Now, obviously, if you can, but as we change things and as that becomes unacceptable, that's the thing. And I made a promise, really, both to my mum, which sounds weird, but like during lockdowns, I'm like, I'm not having this. But also to how my son was treated and what happened with schools, but to myself, which is, I don't want this country that I love to become something that is like they have in some other countries, where you can just get a visit or arrested or shut down or cordoned off for thinking or saying things. It's just not acceptable. Or show me your things, or who are you? No, none of your business is the precedent. Unless you think I'm doing something breaking the law. I'm a citizen of this nation, and we have to be free to live our lives, right? And I think that battle is ongoing, and it's ongoing around the discussion around net zero. It's ongoing the discussion about digital ID, about cash, about free speech, about protest, certainly about the farmers and small, medium-sized family businesses with this new inheritance tax, which we've done a lot of work with, but also around assisted dying bill, the role of the state, and all these issues. And I'd really encourage anyone, because I see the work you're doing, and it's great when you're speaking on GB News and you're out there and posting. It's brave, and it's not just so easy, by the way, just because one happens to be a certain demographic, because sometimes you get even more criticism and family, whatever it is, right? People sometimes go, you're this or a coconut, whatever the terms are, right? You self-hater, and people can be very cruel. And I think that the more people stand up, like you stand up and do it, and the more that is infectious. I don't know about other things, but that bit where people see that people stand up to say, well, we need to discuss these things. I want the pursuit of the truth. It's not even that someone might have the whole truth, but let's have the pursuit of the truth. Let's have an honest, good faith debate and discussion with one another. Let's thrash this out. I'm open to being convinced, right, about some things. There's things I still don't understand and don't know about. I want to hear the discussion. I want to, and I think that we need to encourage that with people much more, and we want more young people to be involved with us. We've got some good young people that are doing stuff now. I'm very excited about some of the things we're seeing. Obviously, we're seeing it's funny because people put comments on there and they think, these people are not going to save you. And they talk about Elon Musk and all of that. I don't want saving. But I do know that having some champions for free speech is much better than not having them. And we've had so many against us that it's nice to have someone who's got some things that are enabled to some things to happen, right? And it's not because everyone's dumb and stupid and he's brainwashed them. It's because we've been able to have the debate and discussion, because it was all getting censored and shadow banned and shut down before. But we need to save ourselves. We need to create our own destiny. I don't think anyone's going to come along and also, like we say it together, we're going to keep everyone honest. The public needs to keep. If we were to stand, we need the public, because that's how you keep people honest. That's how you get politicians who say, right, I know, I get it, right? You've got this thing, it's the Paris Agreement, or you've got this, the Club of Rome, or you've got the WFWH, but I've got a mandate from the public and they've told me no. So it's not me. Or you say it's your own military, or I get what you want to do, but my mandate from the public is to say we're not going to go on these spurious interventions where all of a sudden it's a different conversation, right? And the public holds you accountable, and you have to be accountable, and you have to be. That's what we need more of. And
what drives you, Alan? Because you obviously very successful, super busy, have lots of different projects. What you speak so passionate about wanting to make change. What drives you to do this? I can speak for me when I'm some of the media stuff. My dad used to be in politics a long time ago. Both my parents weren't born in the UK, and I think for me personally, I was brought up in a way which was very much like, you're so lucky to be in Britain, you're so lucky to be born in this incredible country, you have a duty to do something, whether it's education, job, whatever. You're going to have to do something, and you're going to have to, you're so lucky to be here. Like, you should take and I've always just kind of embodied that. I'm British first, and everything else. Obviously, I'm culturally Indian, and I'm Hindu, and all those things. But you're British first, and it was really drilled into me from a very young age about that. What drives you in terms of, because you're obviously super busy. Why have you started together? Why are you so passionate about making these changes in Britain?
Well, I think duty and service and things like that are really important words that and the public and commitment. They're things that are not discussed nearly enough, and they're things that I take very seriously. But I would have doing business was fun, and you can but when everything gets shut down, I lost a lot of money in the run up to the lockdowns. I was doing TV and film production and some major projects, right? And as it happens, I dispensed with our business in hospitality, but I was kind of, as I said, I'd launched this thing called the Nighttime Industry Association. That was coming to an end. And that was partly coming to an end, which I was going to come to an end anyway and hand it over. But because of my position on Brexit, and I made it very clear after Sadiq Khan kept talking about Remain. But I made that clear. And then some people attacked me, a few social justice warriors in the nighttime fraternity, which ironically then, when lockdowns came, they were all panic stricken and they wanted to talk to me about how they could challenge it. And that was all right because I did it. And I recognize, it's a learning thing for people. But what drives me, I'm serious about, I'm not prepared to watch Britain get turned into a Stasi state. I have an enormous gratitude. I'm adopted, right? And I feel very lucky that the circumstances I came into, we didn't have money, but I had a lot of love, and I had a very strong foundation with people that from a point of view of family, that gave me the ability to be a bit free and think, but also to recognize, like, they're not, all my family are not from Britain either, and they come from different places, and I've seen what's happened historically, and I was always very conscious and grateful to have grown up in a place, even when honestly, when I was younger, all sorts of things happened, right? On the way to school, I used to get beaten up by skinheads. I mean, things like that used to happen. But I just put that down to being young, and you'd have to fight back, and it was good. You learn how to deal with things. But I think that we're at a precipice, and the whole of the Enlightenment and the winds of the last 350 years, which is an experiment, it's not given. If you go to some parts of the world, it's very clear you don't have these, like the Constitution or the idea of the Magna Carta or the things that underpin parliamentary democracy. You don't have the judicial system that runs in a certain way, or the division of like the state and religion like you have in America. And the huge sacrifice and the enormous bravery of people like William Tyndale and others that would be burnt at the stake for the right for us to read something, right, or to think about things ourselves, the freedom of speech, the risks people would take, all the things that, in the English Civil War, where people fought for parliamentarians and they took sides, or if you take it later on and you see how everything from the kind of debates that were going on with the Putney debates and the kind of Toll Puddle martyrs, others, all the things that have happened historically in Britain and the people that have put themselves on the line, right through to the First World War, Second World War, political rights, championing those things, arguing against fascism, fighting against fascism for freedom. The irony of people being called fascists when our grandparents fought against them, and Britain was one of the countries that really did that. And then somehow, if you like some of those people, you're all a fascist. And I take that really seriously because I'm not sure, like many people, like when you use terms like Nazis and fascists, it's important that you're very specific and you know what that means and the consequences of those things. It's not because people won't give you a latte or because people think that, you're wrong about a position on Palestine or on Ukraine or whatever it might be. That does not constitute being a Nazi. It's a very different thing, right? And I do not want to have a situation where Britain is taken over by people who say you're not allowed to say that, you can't say this. And there's a kind of correlation, I think, between some of the woke, identitarian, anti-liberal sentiments that are hyper-liberal, anti-liberal, where they will shut you down and suffocate you and cancel you, and some of the radical Islamicist, anti-secular, anti-democratic, and it doesn't all have to be violent, but some of them are very violent, but actually the ones that are not violent but are still anti-secular and anti-democratic and will use it against us. Brilliant book by Bassam Tibi, who talks about this at length, the difference between Islam and Islamicism. But there's a correlation between those that will go around and say, right, this is Sharia law here in Brick Lane, where we're going to beat you up because you're gay or because you girls have got these. And those woke identitarians that say we're going to shut you down and suffocate you. And this broader sense of a state that just imposes, and there's these zealots that say you can't do this, you can't go there, net zero, no travelling, put your rubbish in here. And then there's a sense of, can we be free? Can we be creative? Can we all have the potential? Can we love one another and disagree? Can we have integration? Can we have people with many faiths and of no faith, with all different backgrounds, who respect this country? Can people come here still? And can we still have control of our borders? Can we have institutions that do that? I absolutely believe we can, right? I know Britain's a welcoming country. I've got first-hand experience of it with lots of family. And though, don't take the piss, right? Basically, I mean, let's have it straight. And so it's what motivates me, the cavalier sense in which businesses were attacked and shut down, the cavalier sense in which they were just with a, oh yeah, sorry, but we're going to have vaccine passports, sorry, we're going to have mandates. So you're going to like, what are you talking about? You lot, are you joking? You've just been told to go and do something, do Brexit. And now what you're doing is, where is all that? Where's Cicero, Boris? Where's all your stuff on the classics and freedom and universal rights? Where is it all? Yeah. You and Gove and all that, and you're implementing all this, and then Keir's cheerleading it all more. Yeah. Where's the opposition? I'm like, this lot, I've got to go. And I've not got a short-term memory, right, Loss? I know what's happened. I'm not like one of these guys that, oh yeah, it's just around the corner, we've all forgotten it. No, I have not forgotten it, and I'm not obsessed with the past, but I'm very clear that some of the measures that they're imposing now are linked to that whole outlook, and it motivates me because I'm like, I don't want them to win. I want us to win. I want the kind of things that were used to be seen as common sense in the Thomas Paine sense. Yeah. Common sense, commoners, the people of Parliament, the commoners, common values, common decency, the common voice, us, right? We need that not to be suffocated and drowned out and drenched. And so that's what inspires me. That's what inspires a lot of us at Together. We've got brilliant volunteers. We've got some brilliant people that are paid. We want more people to join us as members, to campaign with us, togetherdeclaration.org. Please join us. Please get involved. And get involved with the campaign. See, we've got all sorts of things we're doing. We're doing hubs around the country in different regions. We've got more events planned that are coming up. But, these kind of conversations are really essential, where people get to understand a bit more, and then we can share them around and get people involved. Because it's like, without sounding corny, with all those self-help things, right? It's about us. We're not going to do it. Don't wait for us at Together to do it. If you want to see the change, you've got to be that change. We've all got to be making that change, but do it together.
No, I think it's fascinating hearing about the work you're doing with Together, and it's so true about COVID. I think some people sometimes have short memories of what happened, where, I always say like it's crazy. A government told the people of the United Kingdom, you cannot leave your house. Like if you just think about that, like maybe if somebody said that to us 4 or 5 years ago, said no chance, no one can leave me. And often now I say, well, yeah, they would. Like when you would do it, you would comply. We sat there and we complied. And I get the fear was drilled in. And I think the first lockdown, I kind of got it. We didn't know what it was. But I think by a second lockdown, me personally, I couldn't understand it, and I didn't like exactly what you said earlier about the suffering thing, where it was flipped in terms of you're a selfish person if you don't believe in the staying at home and stuff. And for me, it was quite rational to think about the being of a finance background. I always talk about how the economy changes people's lives. So the 2008 financial crisis, you can link that to deaths. So if an economy crashes, then people died. It's not as as cutthroat as a virus or a killer virus killing people, but it implements because it means life science companies can't invest, they won't have as much money, their businesses don't grow, innovation doesn't carry on in the medical essence, people kill themselves because they're not going to work and they're not being able to provide for the family. There's like a whole knock-on effect, and I think they can attribute between around 500,000 to a million deaths from the 2008 financial crisis, there or thereabouts, and because it has like a knock-on effect. So for me it was very simple as well. As sad as and as cold as this may sound, people do die. Like, it's not fair. It's not fair for anyone to lose their life, but people do. And to say that a COVID death is more important than a suicide or a heart disease or people who couldn't do surgeries or in that process is, for me, really, that I think at that
Well,
point is when
you're
it
absolutely right.
changed my.
You're absolutely right. It was barbaric and anti-scientific, and it was definitely anti-democratic. But if they'd have put up all the deaths from cancer, stroke, heart disease that normally happen every day and every week alongside that, and then had an honest discussion about excess deaths over the last 5 years and what was happening specifically now, and talked about post-mortems and contextualized it with a cost-benefit analysis, and then said all of that, that would have been more of a all-round discussion and treating the public sensibly. But that is not what happened, as we know. And then people did not get to see their loved ones. And look, I thought about all this. Like, I know people say, "Oh, I do this and I do that," and we've seen brave people stand up against terrorists, right? And I love that. Some of them are from hospitality, some tourists, some Spanish and others lost their lives doing it on London Bridge, and I salute them. But if I'd have had I think about this a lot. If I'd have had a parent in one of those homes, they'd be coming out, or I'd be being arrested, right? There was no, it's like, it ain't happening that you ain't seeing them and they're dying like that, right? And what I'm saying is so many people had to go through that. And it's just unacceptable, particularly when we get flannelled about a ring of steel and then, oh, yes, it is, no, it's not, mask on, mask off. Like, you lot are jokers, right? This is serious stuff, right? These are our loved ones that have brought us up and into the world and have cared for us. And now that's how we're treating them, with this contempt. And as well as our children, you're doing that, right? It's just not okay. And I think that whenever I get a little bit like, oh, it's a bit much, or people are, and then you're like, yeah, what do we want to see, right? And
Yeah.
yeah,
I would love, what you said there. I would have so much more respect for both major parties in Britain if they stood up and said, you know what, we made some really big mistakes during lockdown. Still, probably wouldn't be enough, but we didn't. We know for a fact that we made some serious mistakes, and you know what, we're going to scrutinise it properly. We know that, there was a really good professor who I started following on social media around May time 2020, I've forgotten so long ago, COVID, when COVID hit the first, after 2 months from March onwards, he started posting about cancer. He was a cancer specialist, and he kept posting every month, essentially saying, this is the...
what about Carol Sikora?
That's it, that's the one. And he posted about it being the lowest amount of cancer, people being diagnosed with cancer, and he was saying, this is not good news, cancer hasn't stopped, this is horrible, people are actually just not getting treated. So and those people who would have got their treatment had they not been scared, and there's examples of people who had a cough. I'll be honest, I was doing it with like my dad and whatever, like, you've got a cough, do you really want to go to the hospital? It's probably not worth it, but who knows, that could have been the early stages of lung cancer. And just because of the fear that we were drilled into, that the idea of potentially going to see a GP for lung cancer is actually, it's better to avoid COVID, when we pretty quickly knew that it was nowhere near as disastrous as what they were saying. I think it's really sad, and I think it's amazing how they also, you mentioned about how the medical professions, the people who had to quit their jobs for vaccines, and I know so many people who were in the medical profession who were saying, we don't want to take this job. People are not political at all. People are not, as believing in freedom, or don't have any of these sort of views or anything like that. They would just say, we're medical professionals. I know the research. I know the things. And me personally, I don't want to do it. And I think it's ridiculous that I have to do it to keep my job. I know some who ended up doing the job just so they can keep their job, then later having regrets. I know plenty of younger females who were saying, I want to have kids one day. I don't know what the impact of this jab is. There hasn't been enough and me not being medical, I pretty quickly was on that same page as them, thinking, this is bonkers, like, that this is what's happened to Britain. But how was it for you? Because the thing I always find interesting in this whole discussion is how you've been involved in the arts world, the music world. But I would, with your political views and the way you speak and stuff, I could presume it's quite tough, or like I wouldn't have imagined you to be.
Well, yeah, so I'm not in, so I'm not producing or doing work in that world anymore, except for I do events. I'm full time with Together now,
Okay.
right? So I do a couple of business initiatives, and I've got some things involved where I have, but I'm all on Together. It's full time work. We've got a few full time staff, and then we have volunteers, and we're constant, and we're growing. We're needing to get more people. But yeah, there are some areas that I could never work in now. They just wouldn't do it. I mean, and you always think about that, but I'm like, look, all right, great. So we're going to be one more person makes another film with something maybe in Hollywood, or you do a documentary here, or you put one more commercial event, or you do a thing with theatre, or what, And actually, it's all going to change. And the thing is, people have written things. One of my favourite books is the Joke, and it's by Václav Havel, but it's less known, right? And it's a brilliant. It's a brilliant. Oh, it's actually no, it's not. It's by Milan Kundera. I've even forgotten that now. It's been such a long time. But it's a brilliant book about a joke that's told between people, and what then happens. It's worth reading, right? But it's beautifully written. But the fact is that people have written all sorts of things and done art in a world where they've been censored and terrified, and they've done it beautifully and incredibly. So I'm not going to be shut out and done things. We'll put our own things on. We'll create them. And people, what's happened? People have got enough respect that, like some of the people in the medical profession, some people have seen it in hospitality and elsewhere, who might have thought this is a bit extreme, but they've seen it and they come to respect you for standing up. And some people think we should have had vaccine passports and I'm mad and all that, right? They do, and they wanted to do it. And it was split, right? The live music arena, some of them, it was split. And we had a whole thing behind the scenes, and I was saying, but many, and like we got the support of them, and they were like, this is not okay, and well done, thanks for standing up. And I get stopped all the time by people, right? Who are always saying, well done, thank you, we're involved. But it's lovely, right? It's not enough. I'd love much more people to know Together and to know me, not because of my ego, but because I want everyone to be involved and do things. But yeah, right now, this is all about getting the public out there and doing stuff. But we're going to do some more things. There's going to be stuff. There's going to be some more things. Maybe a bit like the Truman Brewery, smaller versions in different cities, with all sorts of plans afoot.
Amazing. Well, I think we could probably keep this discussion going for like the next hour or so, but we'll wrap things up. But just before we wrap up, we always have like a closing way to finish on this podcast, which is essentially, what is your unpopular opinion in today's culture, today's world, that you think should be a popular opinion? So it can be anything. It can be serious. It can be trivial, whatever it is.
Well, maybe an unpopular opinion is that we've got much more in common with one another, right? And universally, that's why we're called Together. We're fellow citizens, and that we can have love for each other, but we can have absolute contempt for one another's ideas, and we can mercilessly criticize, and we can take the piss, and we can like deconstruct, and we can argue civilly, and we can be we can be fellow citizens, and we can love one another as British people with all sorts of backgrounds, with the best interest of our own nation state and in the world, actually, as international citizens. But that we were able to do that. And the way that the most fundamental point about all that is that we can have open debate and speak freely, and that we're not mortal enemies. We may have very competing ideas, but even then, we should think about seriously how we've come about having our ideas, how robust they are, how flexible we're able to be with thinking and hearing others. Because if our ideas are that good, we should be able to explain them to others, and maybe if they're that good, they'll be convinced by them. And maybe if they're not, there might be something that's not so great about our ideas or about how we're trying to communicate them. And we should be open to that, right? And think about it. And that would be my unpopular, but I'd like it to be a popular idea.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Alan. Great way to end. And yeah, have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.